Support for this episode comes from Modern Football Technology. Modern Football Technology provides real-time opponent tendencies and self-scout while eliminating manual data entry into Huddle, DV Sport, and Exos. If you're tired of tools that are time-consuming to learn and perform inconsistently at best, then we recommend Modern Football for a fresh perspective. Schedule a demo today at teammofo.com to see a battle-tested tool that's proven to perform and deliver value. Mention Coach and Coordinator Podcast or use the coupon code CC10 to receive 10% off your first year. And listen to our recent episode featuring Folsom High School defensive coordinator Jordan Ersick to learn more about how the 2023 California State Champion uses modern football to dominate their opponents.
And about the second or third year of visit, Scott, here's what he said that Sean Payton told him. He said, spacing is the second read to everything. So at that moment, what it became to me was not really the route concept itself, but a philosophy about the passing game. So what does that mean? Well, it means that whether I use a sit over the ball or a spot route and swing or not, it means that from that moment on, we have leaned very, very heavily into routes that have a second layer of rhythm on the backside.
We're back for another week of the Passing Lab, and I'm really excited about this week's guest. Our host, Josh Herring's been doing an excellent job, both in securing the guest for us and then in the conversations as well. So, Josh, thank you again for joining us and doing this every single week. And tell us a little bit about our guest today.
Yeah, so today's guest is Andrew Coverdale, who is a guest. For me, I would have paid money to to get to talk to. Really formative influence on my career and just kind of the way I thought about the game, and just ultra successful, not just on the field, but in the influence he's had on other coaches. So really excited to talk to him. Anytime you talk to Andrew, you're going to get, it's like a fire hose of great ideas getting sprayed at you. So really excited.
Yeah, going back to the beginnings of my career, being a 20-something coach, I remember going to the Cincinnati Glazier specifically to see one guy to sit in front of his 6 sessions, front row, and fill up notepad after notepad. And I had already had all of his, old Coach's Choice books and DVDs and, read through all those. So it was great to meet him there. And then years later, I'm giving a clinic at Ball State University, and there he is in the front row and taking notes. And then, we clinic together individually. He came out to BW one time in clinic with me. So just an incredible thinker on the game. I love how he organizes ideas. A great teacher of the game as well. And I just, flat out copied how he did things with PowerPoint in the early days. He was really using that to maximum advantage to teach. So yeah, here we go. Our Passing Lab with Andrew Coverdale. This is another great one here on the Passing Lab, presented by Coach and Coordinator.
What you see on tape is a direct reflection of what you teach and how you teach. Video is important, but if you don't teach well, you're not going to like what you see on your video. First Down Playbook has been helping coaches teach better for 13 years. It allows you to present installs, playbooks, and practice cards in half the time with NFL quality. Coaching tools like video pairing, a player app, practice schedules, and wristband sheets have made First Down Playbook a program management system with everything in one place. If you're in a position of leadership with your football program, receive a free 1-week look at First Down Playbook. Call them at 512-814-6158 or visit them on their website or social media. Mention Coach and Coordinator Podcast or use the coupon code COACH24 to receive a $100 discount off the normal $700 First Down Playbook team membership price. Links and the phone number are in the show notes. As coaches, we know that some of the biggest hurdles to our team's success can come from off the field. Your team needs support to tackle the endless list of expenses, uniforms, training equipment, travel, and more. But raising that money can feel like a full-time job. Thankfully, there's Vertical Raise. Vertical Raise is the premier online fundraising platform using innovative technology to create the easiest and most efficient system available. Raise more money in less time with a local fundraising coach who works with your team every step of the way to customize the ideal fundraiser. With options for online donations, digital discount cards, premium product sales, and even spirit shops, Vertical Raise has top-of-the-line solutions for every fundraising style. To find out more, visit verticalraise.com and we'll get you connected with an exclusive offer on your first fundraiser.
All right. I want to welcome everybody to the Passing Lab. We've got a really, really exciting episode tonight that I'm looking forward to. We've got a big name. He's a humble guy, and I'm sure he would downplay that, but it's a big name. We're super excited to have him on the show. We've got Andrew Coverdale. Coach Coverdale has had a huge impact on my career. I once listened to him. I think it was 2009, 2010 at a Nashville Glacier. I think I listened to you for 8 sessions. It was awesome. It's a lot to listen to anybody for 8 sessions on anything. Yeah. They better be pretty good. And I got a ton out of it. It was awesome. But Coach Coverdale is offensive coordinator and quarterback coach at St. X in Cincinnati. Well known from his time in Kentucky at Trinity. Has his hands full of championship rings. I think he's working on his toes now at this point. And a lot of you may know him not only through clinic speaking, but along with Dan Robinson, was co-author of some groundbreaking books on passing the football that impacted a lot of guys. I think with the detail that went into those books and just how technical they were. And I think it inspired a lot of young coaches like myself with what they could do. And lastly, Coach Coverdale is the undisputed champion of PowerPoint. If you've ever been to one of his clinics or seen any of his stuff. So, Coach, we're super, super excited to have you on. We got some great things to talk about, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Josh. Thank you for making time to do this. I'm sure I'll get as much out of it as you will. Something that popped in mind that really was kind of unscripted that I think might be helpful to say at the ripe old age of 52. That bunch book, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was 24 years old, and I had a great mentor in Dan. And we had tape that most people didn't have of at that time, the Washington Redskins, who were way ahead out in front of all of it. So we were just kind of doing the best we could. It started as a research project for us. The point I want to make is that the only reason we even tried to market it or sell it is because of a big professional disappointment on my end related to salary and some other things at the place that I was coaching for Dan where some things went sideways. My point being that the early part of my career, because I had zero playing experience really beyond 8th grade, I couldn't get people to hire me for nothing, basically. And the bunch book was a byproduct of real significant professional disappointment on a number of levels that's not important to get into right now. But the point is that book, me not knowing my butt from first base really, has just created all kinds of opportunities from the disappointment. I guess what I'm really trying to do is for people who are in ditches career-wise or not where they want to be, I've been stupid lucky, and it is interesting to bring up something like the book that just illustrates that sometimes out of the most discouraging, disappointing circumstances, things can happen. You can meet people like, I owe Dan everything, and lots of other people too, Kevin Wright, AJ Rickard, a million other people, Bob Beatty. But that thing may be right around the corner, I guess. So anyway, I didn't want to sidetrack, but you mentioning the book, and now that it's almost 30 years old, it seemed the right thing to, just mention.
No, that's fantastic, and that's a really good message for guys. And we'll get it. Maybe mention the book again a little bit later, but the book itself, how cutting edge it was, and how far ahead of its time that it was. And I know anytime you're talking to somebody who wrote something, it's difficult to talk about that, but seriously, really ahead of its time, not just in kind of the way coaching books were written at the time, but literally in the content where there's things in there, maybe maybe this is a discussion about the lack of evolution of defensive football at times, but the things that you guys have as bunch checks in there to attack are still the most common bunch checks today. It hasn't really changed that much. And of course, maybe you weren't seeing that at the high school level at that time, and you guys are studying NFL tape and you were seeing that, and it trickles down. But it's really, I was looking at it today, and I kind of revisit it yearly. And I was looking at it today, just kind of prepping for this interview. And it's really, really was cutting edge stuff for the time, and really still is today. So kudos to you on that. But we'll jump right in. Let's talk ball. So you and I have we had a minor discussion relative to this a while back, a long time ago. But I'm really interested in splits at the high school level and the
Yeah.
impact of high school hashes and just how
Yeah.
different. You and I both study NFL film. We both study college film. And I think, especially as a young coach, for me, you just don't take into account how important high school hashes can be to either improve a concept or that can hurt a concept. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that for a moment. I guess we'll start with my question for you would be, have there been concepts that you've seen over the course of your career that maybe you really wanted to work and you felt like they didn't because of the high school hashes, or maybe there were concepts that really the high school hashes kind of helped it flower and develop and they became really great, you think, because of maybe the space you had to the field, or maybe it was a shorter throw to the boundary? I'll just kind of let you go on that topic.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I spent so many years in Louisville, and we would play our rival, Louisville St. Xavier, at Cardinal Stadium every year, and they never bothered to put high school hashes down. So I was always excited. And then some years the playoffs would be there too. There were a couple years we played 3 or 4 games there. So I would get to cheat a little in those games, and I loved it. But you're not wrong. You're 100% right. I think if I could use one route as a case study, I think slant arrow is the perfect case study for something that's a great concept. The Packers have made a living on it. Lots of people have made a living on it. It's in every NFL playbook. Arrow, slant, dragon, whatever you want to call it. And it's just problematic on the high school hashes for a bunch of reasons. And basically, for the field, if you run it to the field with the splits you need, the angles just get really wonky. It's real advanced vocabulary, wonky. To the boundary, what happens is that point or B gap linebacker can become a real factor. You're not isolating the flat defender in any meaningful sense because he just has so little space that he has to defend. So that's just one that's a major issue, I think, at the high school level that I think is a good weapon, because I think slants in general are the best way to create, the paradox you have with explosive plays. We all want explosive plays because we've all read Brian Billick. The issue with explosive plays is how do you protect yourself long enough to generate the explosive plays? Well, the slant is one of the best ways you can do that because the ball is out on rhythm, but you're hitting a guy that has a chance to knife through the defense. But that club's kind of been taken out of the high school bag, assuming that you're on a hash. The other one that I heard Bobby Peters talk about the soda concept of the Dolphins, and we're all going to play with that. We're all going to see if we can manage that. But that's really a boundary concept, and I have no idea at this point in my life if it works for the high school game. Now, what I do think, I would say, in response to sort of the flip side of the coin, with Coach Beatty at Trinity, which was the bones of our offense there that he brought in 2001, everything was built off the John Jenkins run and shoot, read routes on the run type approach, but it was a semi-sprint action. So if you went back and looked at all of our years at Trinity, we were semi-sprinting, quick rolling more than we were straight dropping. And for a lot of years, we got a lot of mileage on the backside of those routes and so on. But I think the only way we got away with a lot of it was because of the high school hashes. We don't do as much of it now at X, but I think that's something that Bob probably instinctively or explicitly understood, that gave us a real advantage and gave us a chance. We had a lot of quarterbacks during those years that were 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", and so we could really squeeze some juice out of that. Now, the last thing I would say about this, it is very interesting that you bring it up, because I'm determined to be more of a slant team this year for reasons that I mentioned. And so I had somebody that I work with do a study on how many times the ball is not actually on the hash. So what I mean by that is, early in my career, my call sheet and my whole practice structure was left, middle, right. And I've gotten to the point, and part of it's laziness, honestly, where it's just hash mark calls almost all the time. And so I've kind of neglected that in-between area. But if you look at slant arrow, you don't need the ball to be smack in the middle of the field. You just need about 6 feet. It just needs to be it needs to be basically where the college hashes would be. So I had somebody do a 4-year breakdown of our film to see what percentage of the time is the ball at least, not necessarily smack in the middle, although that would be included. But what percentage of the time is the ball at least 6 feet off of the hash to where you could do some of this? And it came in around 31% of the time. Now, a lot of those you would still consider on the left hash per se, but my point is the litmus test is slant arrow. So what I'm saying to you is that going into this year, I'm going to organize my thinking where I have within my base calls and within whatever else I have off the hash calls, which includes middle of the field, so that I can exploit some of those things, if that makes sense. Slant option, the so-called looky route on the backside of stick is another one that can really get squeezed. A lot of Dan Gonzalez's ram read stuff is awesome stuff, but especially if they're in 2 linebacker spacing, you can get squeezed to that boundary side really fast. So I want to do a better job organizationally of having things that I couldn't do on the hash mark, but I'm still getting called because I'm recognizing this 30% of the calls that I'm actually more or less on a college hash, if that makes sense.
Definitely. That's so good. I'm more and more convinced. I've talked to several guys this off season just kind of on that topic, and we in practice, I'm the exact same way. It's hashes pretty much every call, but I'm more and more convinced that you've got to have defined calls on your call sheet for middle of the field. It's almost like a special, it's a situation.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Like for me, if we play in Metro Atlanta, generally everybody has a kicker. I'm sure it gets that way in big school Kentucky and definitely in Cincinnati as well. I mean, your school, they're great at soccer. They've got a kicker, whatever stereotype, but they're going to kick the ball in the end zone. And so that is, you may have, hopefully not that many, but 4 or 5 times that you are going to have the ball in the middle of the field. Well, does that impact my normal opening thoughts when I know I can have this thing in the middle from what I would normally call on an opener? So I think that thought process is something that I've never really gotten into, except in the last few years, just kind of realizing there are some really good things from the middle of the field that maybe we miss out on just by not preparing enough to be able to call them when they're there. So great point. Really good.
So it's interesting because we may just be doing the rules wrong. The officials in Ohio are letting us tell when we have a touchback, they're letting us dictate the hash. I don't know why they started doing that. But where we get embarrassed is on our tempo calls. One of the things we've done to be able, we're not a full-time tempo team, but we do a significant amount of it. But we shorten our calls by just the formation being automatically to the field. And about once every 3 games, we'll look really dumb because the ball gets spotted in the middle of the field and the kids don't know what to do. That happened to us on national TV last year, which was a barrel of monkeys. So I really am growing through that process, which in some ways is me just kind of going back to being more diligent about some things.
So I think probably, and again, this will be, humility will keep you from agreeing with me, but you probably did as much, and I really believe you probably did as much to popularize spacing as a concept as the high school level as anybody, through a variety of clinics that you did and videos. And it was something I think that grew to the point where a lot of high schools were really getting into doing the versions of spacing where it was kind of filtering away a little bit from the NFL and college level. And I know you've been really successful with it. We had a couple years ago running a 4 strong spacing, probably some of the most ridiculous statistics of any pass I've ever had in my career. It didn't even make sense. We were like 26 of 28 or something. So it's been really successful. I know you've been successful recently with Hank. But you also have guys, even some big name guys, who are pretty, they're pretty vocal about their disdain for spacing or hate.
Yeah.
And their spot drop type concepts, they'll say, and they're not as good against match, but there's still people having success with it. And I get it. I do. I get some of the points those guys bring up. So could you kind of talk us through your thoughts on that and its evolution and why it's still been good for you, or maybe it's changed, just kind of those types of concepts?
No, I think it's a similar conversation. It's 2 different conversations. So the first thing I'll say is I think spacing is a good way to tell a little bit about my story in terms of talking to younger coaches, because the way it became a big deal for me is I met Scott Leffler, who's now the head coach of Bowling Green. 2001, he was at Michigan. He was recruiting our quarterback. and we just hit it off. I asked him to talk about some stuff, and anyway, and so I just started going. I was at a time in my life where I didn't have as many family responsibilities. I couldn't do it now, but I would go every spring, and I'd just camp out in Ann Arbor and Toledo for like a week solid, and I would just be a fly on the wall, and when the time came to ask questions, Scott was way ahead. Scott had old VHS tapes of a quarterback coach for the Eagles sitting in his office at midnight explaining stick spacing to him. The quarterback coach was named Sean Payton. So that's kind of where the journey started. But here's the important part about spacing. And about the second or third year I visited Scott, here's what he said that Sean Payton told me. He said, spacing is a second read to everything. So at that moment, what it became to me was not really the route concept itself, but a philosophy about the passing game. So what does that mean? Well, it means that whether I use a sit over the ball and a spot route and swing or not, it means that from that moment on, we have leaned very, very heavily into routes that have a second layer of rhythm on the backside. And at first, it always was stationary routes because, yes, in the spot drop world, it makes sense to have stationary routes to where the quarterback, as he has to scan, whether it starts with an individual route like the true San Francisco 49ers 1986 Jerry Rice slant with spacing, or if you're working a two-man flat fade combination and spacing is the way you're going to save it as a second rhythm, it makes sense at an introductory level to have guys who are stationary who can look at the quarterback.
Right.
But philosophically, it just introduced me to the idea that I never want to cut off half of the field before the ball snap. I just don't. That's not to say that people that have beaters on one side or the other are mere. It's not to say that, they're inferior people or inferior schemes. But for me, my conviction is if my quarterback knows there's always a second act to the play, then I'm not going to be dumb on the front side and I'm going to be much more selective. So anyway, spacing became a mindset as much as it did a route concept. And I will say that when I moved from Kentucky to Ohio, and you see a lot more match type coverage underneath, and you see people doing a better job, not perfect, we have gone to more runaway routes as our second rhythm. We've gotten into some of the Kyle Shanahan stucco return stuff. We've gotten into some jerk routes. But the point is there's still a second rhythm, and that all came out of the original spacing conversation. So yes, the route concept does have some limitations if you're not spot dropping, and I understand JT O'Sullivan's consternation. Like, I get it. But, he's operating a lot out of his NFL experience. I know he coached high school ball in California. But I do still think if you're talking matchups, you still have to make linebackers prove they can do those things. But I also do think we're working more and more into having different kinds of moving parts coming in the quarterback division. We're kind of playing around a little bit with the drive concept and different ways you can bring shallow crosses into his vision. Because, again, it's the philosophy of bringing somebody into your quarterback's vision so that the initial attack side doesn't have to be perfect. So that's the spacing deal. As far as Hank goes, here is something I do think is really interesting about high school ball. I think at college, you attack coverages with the basic understanding that if a team is playing, Rip Liz, or they're playing Tampa 2, that their kids are basically going to play it correctly.
Right.
And that you're going to be able to identify actually what it is a high percentage of the time. In high school ball, it just isn't so. And even at the high levels of, we're playing teams in 5 states this year. Even at the high levels of Midwestern football, there's still a lot of variance in if they're saying we're playing cover 3 or we're playing cover 2. There's still a lot of variance in a linebacker who may take 2.5 steps before he gets out of his run read, before he does what he's supposed to do. There's a lot of ways that hash marks distort things. And so I think there are things that we have to have a little bit different mindset of attacking. Like, yes, we will attack based on coverage, but we also have to attack a lot based on individual traits and how their kids actually play those coverage concepts. Because number one, you can't always recognize them perfectly off film, and I'm not willing to spend that much time. But number two, high school kids are just much less proficient at the match and carry techniques, if they're even trying to do that, or the spot drop, or even recognizing pass itself. So for that reason, Hank and we continue to be a Hank team in spite of me. And what I mean by that is there are things that I find much more enjoyable to my intellectual curiosity. But our kids just have developed a confidence level in it that no matter even the coverages that should stop it clinically and on paper, our tight ends just tend to be better at boxing out over the ball than the linebackers. And our hook routes tend to be better at getting into those windows that shouldn't be there if it's cover two, if it's palms or something. There are a lot of coverages that should be dead against, but because high school kids are not as proficient, and we do spend a lot of time teaching kids how to fight into those windows and frame the quarterback and do that stuff, that it just becomes a high confidence play for our kid, even if, it should be dead against cover two. It should be dead against, flat foot quarters, which we don't see that much of. But we continue to do it just because the individual idiosyncrasies and traits within the coverage, you're attacking guys that just aren't as good at covering folks in high school ball. So yeah, clinically speaking, we should, if I had a conversation, if I called, my old quarterback, Brian Brom, who's the OC at Louisville now, and I said, how, because they run some Hank, but they're only going to run it against this, and this.
Right.
And they're never going to run it against this and this. I don't have those restrictions, but at the same time, I've got to set. There are things that Brian or another quarterback of mine, William Stein, they can take for granted because they know if a team is in rip or Liz match, this is how it's going to play out. We don't always know that. And so there's some things that we can't automatically pry open. It's one of the reasons that throwing in the middle of the field is a little harder in high school, because the linebackers aren't always matched and carried out of there like they probably should be. But that's the beauty of a route like Hank. Hank sort of punishes him for that. So that's a long form of saying why we're still in the Hank game. The best example I can give you just anecdotally is, we pulled our junior quarterback in the middle of the game where he wasn't playing great. Our whole team wasn't playing great. And we threw our sophomore in last year. Well, our sophomore was, and this isn't at Elder High School, which has 10,000 very angry people. So there's a big moment for this sophomore. The first pass I called was Hank. And he got off, but sit over the ball. He read the squeeze and he threw the hook. Not because I'm an awesome coach, but just because over time it's kind of built institutional confidence and credibility with all of our different levels.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's a lot of lessons in there. There's lessons about coaching peer pressure. There's lessons about doing what your kids can do and are confident in, and not being told by somebody else that you can. And obviously there different things work for different people, but it's been successful for us still as well. And so great points.
That's where we'll pause for today's episode, an outstanding part one of this two-part episode with Andrew Coverdale. Be sure to check out all we're doing at coachingcoordinator.com. Go there for our enhanced show notes and links to resources. Sign up for our weekly tip sheet. Get the best ideas from the previous week and trending episodes. And follow us on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski.